City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, regional theater and new play development.
A warm welcome to the American Theater Wing Seminars on Working in the Theater. These are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, located on 42nd Street, where Broadway, off-Broadway, and off-Broadway all come to meet and share the wealth of Broadway theater. This is at the Tony Awards, and we are well known for having created the Tony Awards. But the American Theater Wing is a year-round organization, and behind this award stands a dedicated organization that is devoted to servicing the community through the theater. These seminars are just one of our year-round programs, and they are designed to bring you an in-depth way of looking at the theater. We do one on the performance and one on the playwright-director and one on the production, and today's program is on regional theater, and it's a wealth of wonderful material that's coming to you from the Goodspeed Opera Company, which is located in Connecticut and has come today to 42nd Street in order to talk about what regional theater can and does do and how important it is to the theater. And so before we go any further, I'm going to turn this over to George White, who is going to moderate today's very, very distinguished and knowledgeable panel. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm going to start on my far right, which is not a political comment. Yeah, there we are. With Martin Charnin, who is the director whose work at Goodspeed includes Annie and Jokers, and will direct this summer Can at the Opera House. On his left is Charles Repole, who is the director currently of Goodspeed's Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which is currently playing at the Lyceum on Broadway. And on his left and my right is Sue Frost, who is the associate producer of the Goodspeed Opera House. And again, on my far left, again, and not a political comment, or maybe it is, I don't know. Indeed it is, and he admits to it, there we are, is Max Eisen, who is the national press agent for the Goodspeed Opera House. And next to him, and I was told making his cable debut today, is Michael O'Flaherty, who is the musical supervisor of the Goodspeed Opera House. And on my immediate left is the general manager of the Goodspeed Opera House, who is Howard Sherman. Thank you all for being here. I will depart from my usual role for a second as moderator, since the Goodspeed is a neighbor of mine in Connecticut. And I do happen to be old enough of a dinosaur to remember when the Goodspeed Opera House was the repository, the garage for highway equipment for the Connecticut Department of Public Works. And it was full of tractors and snowplows and things like that. And a person by the name of Albert Selden came along, whose family came from that area, and remembered, at least always reverenced the fact that in this building that housed all this heavy equipment was, for instance, a staircase originally that had been a wooden reproduction of the grand staircase in the Opera House in Paris. And it was Al Selden and his family that decided that perhaps they could restore this wonderful building that was built in 1876 as a tribute by Mr. Goodspeed, known as Goodspeeds, to the centennial of the United States. So Selden got together and raised a great deal of money in, I guess it was 1961, 62, and I guess they opened in 63. They opened, I don't quite remember what it opened with.
Oh, Lady, Lady.
There you are, thank you. Oh, and then
I wasn't there.
I was, but I've forgotten it. And it went on to do Chu Chem, a Chinese-American musical, I remember. But shortly thereafter, they produced Man of La Mancha. And it was the first of what amounts to many, many wonderful Broadway shows, musicals that came out of East Haddam, Connecticut, on the Connecticut River and into Broadway. So that's just a quick, and for those who haven't been there, it's very easy to get there. It is a magnificent 322 seats.
398, actually.
Oh, it's gone up.
Yes, well, squeeze a few in here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. And it's within easy shot of New York to get there, and it's a wonderful, it's right on the Connecticut River, a classic, beautiful venue, including you still have the old act curtain, which was found up in the attic with a wonderful view of the Connecticut River with a riverboat, all of that. So that gives you a little bit of the context of what would seem like a museum theater, but is indeed, and subsequent to that, I want to talk about this with whoever wants to leap in, about the Norma Terrace Theater, which indeed is developing new work for the American musical theater as well, something very, very needed. So why don't we start, Martin?
As is the main stage. I mean,
yeah,
you can't really separate, at least from my standpoint, in terms of my involvement with the first time I was there was in 1976, and Michael Price was one of the first, if not the only, supporter of a musical that I had been trying to get on for 7 years.
Called?
Annie.
Right, Annie.
And it was Michael who decided to have us do it on the main stage. There was no Norma Terrace Theater at that time. Suffice it to say, I think that the success of Annie was responsible for buying the Norma Terrace Theater or purchasing the ground on which it was ultimately built. But we did it there, and we were able to work on it for a relatively long period of time. We were there for the last, I guess, 18 weeks of the 1976 season, and it then moved to Washington and moved into New York. So it's not only that the terrace is a proving ground, the main stage is as well.
What's important for people to know, for people who aren't familiar with Goodspeed, is that Goodspeed, among regional theaters and frankly among almost any theater, any kind of theater in the country, has a very particular and unique mission. Goodspeed has always existed to preserve and advance the form of the American musical. There are no other theaters out there that ply that particular trade as regularly, and of course we think as well, as Goodspeed. It's interesting in this day and age where suddenly we see more and more on Broadway the rage of let's dig up some old musical and turn it into something new. Michael Price, when he became the executive director of Goodspeed, made absolutely clear a vision which wasn't quite that sharp when they first opened, that Goodspeed was going to be a place about the American musical. And it's gone forward both taking classic musicals that have not been seen in many, many years and bringing them back to the stage to work for audiences today, as well as introducing new musicals. And Charlie and Martin have both been involved with that process.
But even on that level, I guess it's true of most theaters, but when you take the old pieces, and certainly, for instance, in my case, I actually started at Goodspeed doing actually I think it was 71. I said 60-something, but 71, and I was in the chorus of Little Mary Sunshine. And in that production, it was, I think, a fairly true example of how that show was done. And it was a repeat of that show. But so many of the other shows, for instance, Very Good Eddie, which was another show that I did, was originally 4 hours long. You know, I read the manuscript of that. I read Very Good Eddie when they did it. So in a sense, you're also creating new works within the old work. The old work is framed, but we couldn't put on a 4-hour Very Good Eddie. So what you do is you hone it and you develop it and you shape it to form what is the essence, hopefully, of the old show and what is a period of the old show and the style of the old show, but give it a contemporary viewing. So even in that sense, so many of the old musicals, I believe, need that because they were written for a different time and they were written for certain performers, or they were written when books weren't quite, you know, Very Good Eddie was a vintage musical. Really, the book was still trying to find its way.
Well, picking up on that, Charles, some more, because you've just opened, you know, Gentlemen Prefer
Blondes.
You know, and of course that is almost an icon of a certain kind of American musical, and particularly with Carol Channing's association with it. What was your approach as a director to that? Because, you know, you've got that initially sort of over your shoulder.
Yeah, well, you do, but when I read it, I love the old musicals, and I love the innocence of the old musicals. I like the simplicity of the old musicals, and I like the jokes of the old musicals. So I'm a good person to be directing old musicals, and I am. But what I learned when I read the original script, or what was considered the original script, it really was a two-character show. It was about Dorothy Shaw and Lorelei Lee. It wasn't a vehicle for one person. What happened, I think, with the emergence of when Carol Channing did it, it became that vehicle because of the kind of personality she was, and maybe then as it was formed. I don't know. I never saw the original show, and I don't know how it was done. The movie was another story totally. The movie was about Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell, and it was really developed for the movie. It has very little to do, in actuality, with the original show. So what we did was try to take these two ladies and show how they travel, and how they traveled on this trip, on this little breeze of a trip, you know, with not too much substance other than the innocence of, they all like each other. They like people. You know, they call Lorelei a gold digger. Well, I guess she is on one level, but on another level, Lorelei brings a lot of joy to people, and no one gets hurt. You know, there's no image. She may get the diamond tiara and she may get the diamonds, but the guy that gave it to her was happy to give it. Now, that's another sensibility, another era, and it was the 20s. And the books were, this was written in 49, the books weren't as strong as they are today.
Well,
but
certainly. I mean, you have to, when we took a look at Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, it hasn't been produced a lot, and there's a reason for that. I mean, the second act almost didn't exist. And Charlie had to take a look at that, and he had to go back to the source material. He had to go back to the Anita Luce book. He had to go back to, he looked at the movie, he looked at all of it, and pulled it together, and recreated something that essentially hadn't been on the page, you know.
So
and we sort of took a flyer with it.
It needs a
and he
beginning,
created
a middle,
a
and an end, you know.
Yeah.
And they often didn't. They would have a first act and the second act. As long as you had the first act, it was okay. And the star would do Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend on an empty stage and do it as she wanted to. Well, I don't think at least that's not the way I wanted to do it. I wanted to try to preserve it.
Yeah, that is tough, because if you had to go back to the source material and piece it together, you didn't have, you know, Carol Channing, which, you know, but you had to deal with that, the ghost, even though she's alive.
And you deal with it all the time. You almost never not deal with it. I don't mean in directing it, but in the public's eye. Actually, more than Carol Channing, I've found Marilyn to be the stronger influence on the public eye.
Really?
Yes, because Marilyn had such an incredible innocence and sexuality, and such a universal recognition that it's very. That was the piece that I had the hardest part with.
On a more mundane level, there's a videotape. There are thousands of videotapes all over the country. People can just go out and see Marilyn Monroe's performance from 1953. The Carol Channing performance is one that people remember. They can listen to the recording, but they can't actually see it.
And they remember.
Goodspeed is more than Gentlemen Prefer
Oh,
Blondes.
yeah.
So that I like to get
Yeah.
back to the very beginning and talk about regional theater. What is regional theater? Would you explain that?
Particularly in this context of a musical, because it is unique. How do you choose your work? Here it is, a place that is not certainly in Minnesota. It's very near. It's very accessible to New York, to Broadway, if you will, which I would think is both exciting for a producer and a general manager, but also something that you have to deal with, Max, in terms of selling it. I mean, how do you? Let's start with you, Max, on that one, because
Goodspeed to me is Very Good Eddie, Whoopi, the Leave It to Jane, Going Up, and you're sitting here with precious old material, and done to a great degree originally, and with a new approach, done with life, done with joy, done with fun. And you have to go out there and, Goodspeed has done a great job of selling it to Connecticut. And then how do you expand it from there? And the job was to get the interest, one, of the people in New York. So you start with the press, then you start with the...
excuse me, how do you start with the press? What do you
start
say?
the press,
oh
well,
my God, why do I have to go to
you
East
start
Haddam?
to tell them there's a theater up there, and they're doing something that you haven't seen in 25 years. And perhaps the people there, the reviewers, would like to come up and have a look. And lo and behold, you start. First, of course, years ago, we'd have a great big outing. We'd have a bus, and we'd load it up, and they'd all go, and we'd give them a show and give them a dinner, and that started the reviews in New York City. And where some of the newspapers have picked it up that it's a must that they have to cover every summer. That was a gradual development. From there, too, you then develop it with the theater community, be they actors or directors or theater owners and producers, and they got introduced to the theater. And then you expand out over the country. And I do a national mailing, which I've done for years, and I introduce the theater all over the country, and lo and behold, we get the critics from Washington, D.C., and from San Francisco, sometimes Los Angeles, Boston, what have you. And the theater now has become a national theater.
No,
but
I have to
20
jump
years
in
of work.
At this point because I want to take what Max said and go a little further with it, because I think the Goodspeed for many, many years was Whoopi and Very Good Eddie and Going Up and Jerome Kern and classics, old classics, because that's essentially what we produced for several years, and that's what started us on the road to what we are. But we made some changes along the way several years ago where we decided that we needed to move out of the 20s and the teens and start to look at the more recent works in the canon. For several years before we had the Norma Terrace, Michael, I think, put a new show on the main stage every year. And sometimes we hit and sometimes we didn't. With Annie we hit, with Zapata we didn't, but we kept trying and kept putting them out there. And I think, Michael O'Flaherty came to us when we did a musical called Superman. Strauss and Adams, and that was a 60s show. That people don't think of us doing the more recent
more and more
projects.
we realize that 60s musicals are now 30 years old.
Yeah,
I mean, it
35,
still
yeah.
qualifies as a revival.
Sure.
And nobody's seen them. And there are shows like, for example, Guys and Dolls doesn't need Goodspeed's help. Everybody's seen Guys and Dolls. But there are shows out there, for example, if you stay within the Frank Lesser canon, Most Happy Fella really had not been seen and not been produced. And what Goodspeed does is it reintroduces works into the musical repertoire. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes has not had a major production since the original Broadway production years ago. There was an attempt, they brought it back in the early 70s in kind of a mishmash version called Lorelei, but nobody had ever really seen it. I can tell you that all over the country now, you are going to be seeing productions of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Again, that's a particular example, not to say that Blondes is the only one, but Most Happy Fella, in the past 3 years, you've seen productions of Most Happy Fella like you've never seen. Goodspeed takes as its mandate, looking in its work with the classic musicals, looking for those shows which haven't somehow stayed in the mainstream. So you will not see Oklahoma, you will not see Fiddler on the Roof, you will not see Guys and Dolls at Goodspeed, but you will see Promises, Promises, and you will see Most Happy Fella, and you will see Can Can, and Strike Up the Band.
How does Goodspeed function as a producing company?
Who makes
what
those
about
decisions?
What about
It's a benevolent monarchy.
What about the unions, and what about your contracts, and what about subscription?
We are,
we're
Lort Theater. We operate under a B.
Lord, would you explain that?
Lort is League of Resident Theaters. So we're a member of it's about 60-odd theaters, regional theaters in the country. That it's a collective bargaining unit, basically. And we have an agreement with Actors Equity and with Society of Stage Directors and Choreographers and United Scenic Artists. And we also deal with our local musicians, and so that's basically the labor pool.
And you have a large subscription?
We don't really think of it as a subscription. I don't know, Howard, whether you might want to talk about that a little bit more. We do have subscription,
But you do have a
but
subscription
We do
and
have
members.
we
you
do
know.
have
it's
subscription,
members,
but
really.
membership is really the basis of people's commitment to Goodspeed.
What's the difference between membership and subscription?
Well, membership
Subscribers.
are those people who've seen fit, above and beyond whatever commitment they make to attend and buy tickets for a show, to contribute something to Goodspeed as a whole. Goodspeed, like any not-for-profit theater, does not exist solely on the basis of its ticket income. It needs contributions and support, federal, corporate, individual. And membership is really the core of that, and it is our members, who are some nearly 9,000 households strong, who've really made a commitment that even if they don't see all 6 shows that Goodspeed produces each season, they're doing that something extra, and that for us is the core of the people who are most important to us, which is membership. And that's a little bit of an inversion from what many resident theaters do, but not all that far removed.
How many, for instance, I understand, heaven knows, the membership business, but of course, garnering that kind of goodwill and that kind of support. I know there's the Goodspeed Opera House Foundation, which gives membership privileges. Isn't that right? Where do you get where do you develop those lists, and how do you market that around the state?
It's been years and years and years of people consistently coming. I think the person who's absent from this panel is Michael Price, the executive director, and I think Michael spent the first 15 years of the Goodspeed standing at the bottom of the grand staircase at the end of every performance saying, good night, I hope you like the show, I hope you like the show. And if people don't, they tell him. If people do, they tell him. But he spent a long time developing one-on-one relationships, and I think the audience really feels like they're a part of the Goodspeed when they come there. We work very hard to perpetuate that. And it's really just grown over and over the years.
We also have the governor coming quite regularly, 1 governor, 2 governors, 3 governors, and the U.S. senators come.
Right.
So we
Aside from all of that, which in effect is obviously very important, in the final analysis, it has to boil down to the work. And ultimately, what you've got to, you could have the most gorgeous setting in the world and the best press agentry in the world, but basically what is encouraging about Goodspeed and why it is encouraged in the LORT community, and particularly on the East Coast, is because people who theoretically only used to work on Broadway very willingly would come up to East Haddam, Connecticut for a length of time to be able to develop material. And in the ability to be able to develop material, you would find that they would be producing the material that ultimately gave. So it was one hand washing the other. The Goodspeed was helping the theater, and the theater was helping Goodspeed. The product was helping the theater was helping the product, and it was very encouraging to be able to know that you could go into a circumstance for a length of time where your advertising was taken care of. I'm talking about it now from purely and simply from a work standpoint.
Yeah, exactly.
A director goes into a Broadway circumstance, and you have to have your meeting with Wilner Ladon, you have to have or with Nancy Coyne, and then you have to go and find a press agent, and then you have to go and find a shop that will build your house, and then you have to go and hire a musical director, and you have to go, with the possible exception of what used to exist down at Joe Papp's, that kind of circumstance just doesn't exist anymore. It's a studio. And in effect, Goodspeed's relationship to the artistic community is that it provides all of those things. It takes that burden off your back. Not to say for a moment that you're not intricately involved in it, but the advertising is taken care of. You don't have to worry about the mailer going out. You don't have to worry about tickets being sold. You don't have to worry about an ad appearing in the paper. So it's a very relief-oriented circumstance.
How does that differ from the Playwrights Horizons and Manhattan Theater Clubs and, theater companies that are around New York? I'd like to define, regional.
Around New York is the key word. You can theoretically be anonymous at Goodspeed to the extent that you can go up there and do the work. While it is indeed only 2.5 hours away, the trains don't run that frequently. It is an effort to go up there. You really have to want to go and see the thing, whatever the thing may be. Whereas here, if you're at Playwrights, on your second night, you are a victim of of the community. And you cannot do anything quietly, privately. You can't make a mistake. Oh my God, Stephen is coming tonight, so we have to put in the wrong second act. Or Hal is going to be there tonight. We have to make quick... you have the opportunity to work, and that is basically what I think we all want to be able to do, to get at it, to work at it. They're not... I mean, musicals are probably the last cottage industry experience that exists in
Wouldn't you say that it has replaced the, quote, road, unquote, in many, many ways, in what that implied, not in terms of, I mean, but the old days of Boston, New Haven on the way?
In effect, it is the route into New York.
If you want it
if
to
you
be.
if you want it to be that.
Yet it's interesting. Regional is sometimes used regarding theater as a pejorative, and I don't think it is. I've spent virtually my entire life working.
Did I
only
imply
in regional.
that?
No, or
No,
resident
I
theater.
didn't think you did.
What's interesting is it's theater that exists within a community for a community. And I think and I happen to prefer to use the word resident theaters because regional means as opposed to being in New York. Whereas resident, it's about you live within a community, you work within a community. You bring in artists like Martin, like Charlie, to do work and to bring it to your local audiences. At times, that work, through any variety of circumstances, may have the opportunity to go on to commercial runs, to other not-for-profits, et cetera, but you work within your community, you have a long-term relationship with a group, with an audience, which in New York, because of the multiplicity of outlets, because of the huge population base you're within, if you walk around New York City and say, oh, I work at Playwrights Horizons, somebody may or may not know Playwrights Horizons, they may or may not know what's playing there. If you were in the state of Connecticut and you say, I work at the Goodspeed Opera House, they know exactly where you are, what they do, and 99 times out of 100, they're going to tell you how much they love it. And what's always appealed to me about resident theater, and I think what's made Goodspeed special, is that ongoing relationship with an audience and people who are there because they want to be there and make the trek to get there to see a kind of work they can't see anywhere else.
Now, that is absolutely true, and it makes it marvelous. It's developed its national and international reputation, sort of thanks in many ways to Max, but along the way.
No, that grew out.
Yeah.
Basically, the shows that are produced at Goodspeed are for the people in Connecticut and from Goodspeed. That it goes from there is the plus that happens every now and then. It's the magic that can happen. But basically, at Goodspeed, we do it for the people who come there and have been there and have been coming for years.
Yeah. Now, who makes the decision, or, for instance, about the plays? Now, maybe that's for Marty. For instance, did you bring Michael Price, Can? Did he come to you? How did that, what happened here? Well, maybe, or Michael,
there's
do you?
5 or 6 of us who
Yeah.
meet.
Yeah.
Sue and Warren Pincus, the casting director, and Howard and I and a few other people. And
You have a choice of shows?
and we just have
We
lists
have a
and
file
an
that
ongoing
we go
list.
through, and we go back and forth, and we keep talking about shows, and maybe this is the right year for it, and we kind of try to juggle a season.
The biggest problem now is that a lot of what we want to do is not available to us anymore. We keep having the rights pulled because everyone wants to do revivals in New York. And
We joke about the fact that we're going to do a season in a couple of years of the last few shows that we wanted to do that we couldn't do because they were going to be done on Broadway, and they're still not done on Broadway, so now we're going to do them again.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And we probably have about 3 seasons worth at this point.
Yeah.
What about casting?
Well, Warren Pincus is our casting director in New York. He's been our casting director, I think, pretty much from the beginning.
About 20 years.
For about 20
20
years.
years.
And what happens is Warren and the director and the choreographer and the music director go through all the preliminary casting auditions. Either Michael or I come in to see how things are going toward the end. It's a collaborative effort, certainly. I mean, Michael ultimately makes the final decisions, but he does it pretty much with the concurrence and support.
And one of the things that has developed is that by virtue of the work and by virtue of the promise and by virtue of the fact that you're there for a length of time with gainful employment in a lovely community, the level of actors from 20 years ago to now has dramatically risen, to the extent that 20 years ago there was a semi-resistance in the same way that there was always a resistance to being on a soap opera. you would say, oh my goodness, it's not really acting, it's just being on a soap opera. And in the same way you would say, well, it's only Goodspeed. 20 years ago there was this kind of, but subsequently, as I said, the level, the quality of people that act in the acting community who will now kill to go up there and work, you know, for whatever the Lord contract is. The other good thing about the Goodspeed is that it's a great leveler. One of the things that you always contend with in a production is this concept of who's more equal in a show. And there's a nice equality up there, so that the guy who is playing Daddy Warbucks is as important as the youngest, smallest orphan, for the simple reason that they are both in the same dismal accommodation or wonderful accommodation that they may be in. No, they're sharing. Well, I mean, it's not the Taj Mahal, but part of that is its attraction, because there are no distractions. You go up to Goodspeed to work. You go up there. It's wonderful. There are, I mean, only last year, I believe, did a new restaurant surface in East Haddam.
That's right. Yeah.
It had been closed
Just
for...
work, you don't eat?
The most ill-favored nation.
Yes, right.
But you talked about the actors coming up there. Do you have a resident company?
No, you don't have a resident company.
No.
Every show is
Okay.
cast
Every show is
individually,
cast.
and specifically to its need, which is another good thing. So, I mean, I came with Michael today from Can-Can auditions, and we saw the first blush of principal auditions this morning. And I would say that about 75%, if not more, of the people that not only are we interested in, but who came, were people that had never been at the Goodspeed Opera, who were submitted for the very first time to Warren, who theoretically maybe the shows weren't right, but I think it's a level, a quality of actor that I was just dazzled
Who
by.
submits them? Agents?
Yeah.
But isn't there,
Do you have a casting agent in your company?
Warren Pincus is our casting
Is the
director.
casting director
Yeah.
who makes the contacts
I see.
with
He
the agents.
sends out breakdowns to all the agents, and they send him back, you know, suggestions.
And
And
we have open course calls for this.
But you were going
How-
But Michael, you must see a pool of people. I mean, it's interesting. You know, years ago, everybody thinks about Broadway, and they think of all of these musicals and all these kids who want to be in musicals. And of course, we know that there are fewer and fewer productions on Broadway in general. So it must be interesting to see all these people. You know, and I guess this maybe why you're seeing all these new people is we're one of the outlets they have. They don't have.
Well, and
you're a
you're the
very
ticket.
serious outlet.
Yeah.
I mean, Goodspeed is a very, it's up there in
I
the
assume so.
first echelon, the top echelon of resident theaters or whatever, or what do you want to call them? Regional resident theaters. Okay, that exists in the country.
And certainly on the younger end, on the chorus calls and all that, I mean, we hundreds and hundreds of people turn out.
I would think, this is an aside, but and it's my sense too that the training or the quality of the younger people will almost break your heart, because they're so good and there's so little places to put them. I mean, these are marvelous young people coming along with a narrowing field.
Where do they get the experience?
Exactly.
Could you explain the working under a law contract for your staging and your backstage or your unions?
Well, I don't know specifically what you mean.
Well, I mean, how does it differ? I mean, your contract with LOT, for example.
As opposed to a production contract,
Yeah.
a New York contract, well, it's less money, generally. The resident theaters have a minimum basic rehearsal period, depending on the size of the theater. I don't think that's necessarily different from a production contract, but it's the working rules are a little bit different, but not specifically. You do fewer 10 out of 12, so they have fewer longer days. We don't necessarily tech as long. But
What
I don't
about
think that the
rehearsal
working
period of time?
The rehearsal period, at the Goodspeed, we rehearsed for 4 weeks.
Which is 2 weeks of preview.
And
which
then we
is fairly
preview for
consistent with
2
what
to
you
4
would
weeks
find
of
in
previews, yeah.
But
Yeah.
something that
More than
Martin
that.
was saying
Yeah.
before
It's more
about
than that.
the family and the rehearsal, and I just want to ditto something in a way. Because you are up there, and because there's all this talent up there, it's, I almost want to say a trapped environment. It's not. It's a family environment. If you believe in the family of theater, it is a family up there, and each member is an equal member of the family. And because you're there, there is no bank to go to, or another audition to go to, or a fight, with the landlord. It's all there. So oftentimes you have a sense of doing the work more closely with the actor as a director. And you can change schedule, and you're allowed to try things, you know, and you can try something in the morning and then change the schedule because it didn't work and do the same thing in the afternoon but do it a different way. Because people are available to the work. They're there to do the work. They're not there to rehearse the 8 hours, and if you didn't call me in it, where are they going to go at 2 in the afternoon? And I don't mean that in a bad way. They're anxious to do the work. They're anxious to be present in the work. And in some ways, you get to be more collaborative, I think, with the actors.
I have to keep getting back to the business end of it.
Oh.
I'm sorry. What
Okay.
about salaries, and what about royalties, and what about the cost? What about profits?
Well, it's a not-for-profit, so there's no such thing as profit.
What about surplus?
What about surplus? Goes right back into the till. We haven't seen surplus in years.
Goodspeed's very interesting. Unlike even most of the resident theaters, because we exist in this incredibly bucolic setting, which, depending on my mood, I refer to as either Brigadoon or Petticoat Junction, we face challenges that many resident theaters do not. We are in a small town of 3,000 people. We're finally getting a sewer system next year. That's new. And that's going to be a big deal. The very first franchise store just opened up across the river from us. We're talking about a very, very rural community. So when there are those productions which may bring something back above and beyond meeting our costs, the money goes into things like housing for the actors, whatever Martin's comment about their quality may be.
No, I'll live to regret
You
this.
will, because you wait till you come up this summer.
Listen,
We're working
dismal
on
is a
housing
step
for
up.
Can
That's
now.
okay. Dismal.
But we've had to, as the operation has expanded, we have had to make a place for these people, for this family to live. We produce, the line goes, we produce at Goodspeed by beds. I don't mean that in any salacious manner. We mean it by how many people can we have in town at once working on how many productions. And in the month of June, we're going to be facing about 15 people with Swinging on a Star. We're going to be bringing in about 30 total for Can-Can. We're going to have Honky Tonk Highway running at Chester. That'll probably be another 10 beds or so. We're going to be running our cabaret at the Gelston House, a late-night cabaret that Michael operates. We're going to have housing for those people. It's an amazing juggling
Which
act.
explains why Warren Pincus keeps saying to me, they're married, hire them.
Yeah, that's right. Of course. Yeah. Well, you know, and I will continue on the business side. But I want to digress for a second because there is you keep saying family, and I think that it is true. Although there is no resident company, I'm just seeing around here, starting with all of you here, starting right with Max and right through to Martin, a sense of a Goodspeed family, even though you're not always on salary. But I sense that. And Charles, for instance, going back to you, you said you started there as in the chorus.
I did.
And how did you get a job directing from it? Is that because it grew, you know, the old thing, what I really want to do is direct? Did you actually say that?
It's actually, it was always the truth. No,
but it is a family, I mean, isn't it?
I think it's very much a family.
But you left it after you were in the course. You didn't continue working on every production every year.
No, but when I say family, I mean the family of theater, you know, like the family of man, the family of theater. And you do know each other, and you do learn how to work with each other. And so every time I go back, I've been there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times over the last 20 years. That's a lot of times to go back to the same
That's exactly
place.
what will happen to me this summer. It will be the 5th time that I will go back. And that's a pretty healthy...
it's a safe place to be.
How length of time will you go back?
Well, the first thing that I did there was in 1976.
So when you go back this time, how long will you be there?
I'll be there for more than that. We'll be there for the 4 weeks of rehearsal, however many weeks of preview, and theoretically, I would say another 2 weeks, and then whatever kind of trips you keep on making up throughout the run of the show. The show will open on the 7th of July and run through September. So you're going to have an opportunity to go up there and see how it's doing for a length of time.
What happens with the show when it moves from Goodspeed to New York, for example?
If it
What happens?
moves from Goodspeed to New
All
York,
right.
it is not.
If,
I mean, it
all
would
right,
be.
what happens if a show moves? But you have had shows that move from Goodspeed to New York.
Well, I mean, for
always been a
example,
different
it's a different situation.
Depends who moves.
What
it, quite
happens with
honestly.
this situation with Goodspeed and when you come
Goodspeed
into
maintains a percentage of the under. They become attached to us. I mean, Goodspeed is a part of the underlying right of Annie in perpetuity.
That's with a new show.
With a new show.
revival, we don't
Let's
necessarily
stick
have
with
that.
Annie then. Go on with that.
Well, as I
Somebody-
said, Goodspeed has been involved as a percentage holder in the Annie underlying rights from the beginning. So Michael and it happened to have been me, because I was the person who brought Annie to Michael, made a deal, and Michael's deal was then honored with all of the subsequent productions. And he is a participant in everything. Goodspeed is
wherever Annie goes and whatever production.
revenue was derived from Annie in any conceivable venue,
Right,
and that
okay.
included the movie, that included the keychain, that included, I mean, it's everything, all the way
Right,
down
okay.
the line. So when it hits, it does indeed strike the mother lode. But there's only one of those every, what? 200, 200
You never plan for
well,
it.
you certainly can't plan for it, and you certainly shouldn't count on it. I mean, you can't go there in order to make that happen, because you will get slapped in the face very quickly. You can't assume that that's why you're going there. You are going there to do the work, and you are going there to hopefully, as you point out, bring more material into the literature, or back into the literature of the American musical theater.
Initially for the Connecticut community.
Absolutely.
And
Yes,
then-
for the Connecticut community.
Absolutely.
But then
If
that raises what goes on at Chester, which is an interesting thing, which is soon kind of your baby.
Right,
Yeah.
Chester is the Norma Terrace Theater. It happens to be in the town of Chester, so if we flip-flop the names, that's why. Well, the Norma Terrace has been there. We're going into our 11th season. It's a converted knitting needle factory that we turned into a 200-seat theater. We had been trying out new shows, and by trying out, I mean doing readings and real black box stuff in our rehearsal studio, and we outgrew that. So we went into this second stage. How many shows have we done there since 1985?
I think we're about
84?
27
It's like 27 new musicals. And several of those have gone on to receive other productions. Several of those are in the process of going on to receive other
I mean,
productions.
went
a
to
very
Broadway.
serious
Which
case
one?
in point as far as my relationship
Harrigan Hart.
to the Norma Terrace is that when we did Annie 2, we had opened in Washington. We were sort of the Exxon Valdez of musicals when we opened in Washington, and Michael came to. Well, actually, it wasn't even Michael. It was Sue, who came to Washington, and we made an arrangement with Michael where we were going to go back into rehearsal at Chester, and we worked on it for 14 weeks there, and then subsequently it went out on the road and ultimately came into New York. So he's been involved in both Annies, the Annie 1, Annie 2, and Annie Warbucks, all three of them.
Can you tell us what your salary was for the actors on these 14 weeks?
$4.37.
No,
how about your Lord
the
contract? It's your
Lord
Lord.
B scale is, I think, about 525, something like that, and
It is
essentially, I think it's about
$525.
$525 a week. Housing is on top of
With
that.
housing?
Housing is provided, and that's basically the scale chorus minimum, and then you have increments on top of that, and we pay our principals more than that.
But the Lord contract is one that recognizes parts pay, as an equity
Sure.
contract does.
And understudy pay
And
and
understudy
things like
pay
that.
and dance captain pay, so it's not really that different. The numbers may be lower, but nevertheless, incrementally, it makes the
The
same.
Norma Terrace, though, is a D.
The Norma Terrace is a D, and that
That's
scale is, I think,
a lot
$100 less a week.
What kind of obligation do you have to the actors? Let's say you decide, such as in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, obligation do you have contractually beyond the maybe moral commitment to bring them into New York?
There is none.
There is none. So it's
purely moral.
It's
purely moral, and I've actually come into New York in 3 shows, one as a director and 2 as an actor from Goodspeed. And
I think it is moral, and I think also when you're developing a project, if you think, I'm going to just go back to something that was said before, we're doing the work at Goodspeed for the audience at Goodspeed. Yes, it's a wonderful outlet and it's a wonderful showcase for the material, and sometimes because of press, because it's close to New York, and because of the New York reviews, other things can happen to it. But you really are doing the work there. And on that point, when there's a company that has worked so hard on creating, in some ways, a new Gentlemen Prefer Blondes or Annie or whatever the show is, it's their contribution. That's what I meant about family. It's their work. And if something wonderful happens, if possible, you should bring that family in. And they should also have that experience of moving it and seeing what the next issue is and how does it move and how does it translate. But you're really doing the work there. And then, yeah, so I think in most cases, at least in all the cases that I came into New York, the company stayed together. And we were the company that was brought in.
Well, also,
what about your costume and scenery shops? Do you have people that run those?
Yes.
Those
One of the
right
interesting
on
things about Goodspeed, actually, is that, going back to the family thing, it's an unusual situation that there are 37 or more full-time, year-round employees at the Goodspeed Opera
Does
House.
that take in management and everything?
Yeah.
It takes in everything, but we have
Even in our
our
dark
department
months.
heads in our production areas are all full-time employees. In fact, we blessed with a long-term department heads. I mean, some of the department heads have been there 10 years. And we have our own scene shop and costume shop and a paint barn where we paint all our scenery. Everything is completely in-house, ingrown.
well, now, what happens then when you move a show into New York, for instance, with those, they can't, obviously, you have to scale up, which there are two
Right,
three
and
grades,
again,
and
it
also
depends on
musically
how
you
you
have
do
to
it.
scale up, because you're not suddenly with that small...
Well, actually,
Well, we
didn't
did.
have Blondes.
No,
we
No, I know you didn't
no.
in Blondes, but I
and
mean...
certainly with Most Happy Fellow, we stayed with those two pianos. So, but what happens is depends on the venue you go to, and it depends on how it's conceived.
Now,
but
legally, can you
we're in
bring
a
in those,
tiny space,
Oh,
and
I
we
know.
haven't even talked about the physical restrictions of this space.
Yeah, that's where I'm...
It's silly. It's tiny. Nobody should do anything in that space, and we do big musicals. So everything has to be either expanded or completely rebuilt.
If it's moved.
If it's moved, yeah.
However, the
difference.
challenge-
Yeah, Matt, well,
I'd like to
Sorry.
add something. You know, in addition to coming to Broadway, we've gone to Washington, D.C., we've gone to Philadelphia, we've gone to Detroit, we've gone to California, and also we've toured. So
What
Broadway
happens to
is
your
not the
budget
only
then?
world that is open to Goodspeed.
that is, it's a wonderful...
What happens?
Whenever we leave the Goodspeed, it is always with the assistance of additional money. It's always another theater or an outside producer, because it's not the wish of Michael Price or the board to put the foundation at risk beyond what we know we can absorb financially. So once you take a show out of the environment, it's got to be supplemented by someone, or we wouldn't.
The
You
profit
don't
will
want
come back to you, in a sense.
Well, I mean, we would certainly hope to receive a share of whatever profits there would be, but generally someone else has to take the risk.
Michael and Sue and the Goodspeed is not producing for Broadway. They're
No, but when it
producing
does
for...
happen, well, I
when
just
it
want to
does-
know what
yeah.
happens.
Right,
It
but I
always-
think
it does
every show
happen.
is
I think
different.
every show probably has its own engine that gets driven by some captain or in a different way. I know, for example, here with you guys, it was Tony Randall and the liaison between the National Actors Theater in New
Most
York.
Happy Fellow was Lincoln
and
Center, and
Most
the
Happy
Doolittle,
Fellow was Lincoln
Mark
Center,
Performed.
and Annie was Lewis Allen and Mike Nichols. I mean, so
Very Good Eddie was David Merrick,
David Merrick.
literally.
No,
Ashton.
and Max Brown and the Schuberts.
Right.
But I mean,
Goldman.
David Merrick was the one that pushed us.
Right.
There's
It all
usually a
has made
driving
it
force
happen,
behind
but
But then
really
you have
it
to
came
go into
through
a
Max
different
Brown and Byron
union and a
Goldman.
different
I know.
scale. If you come to
Absolutely.
a David Merrick, let's
Absolutely.
say, on a
And
Broadway.
generally, if you come to New York, you come in under a production contract. Blondes, because it was National Actors Theater, came in under a LORT contract. When we moved Most Happy Fellow, we went to the Mark Taper Forum playing at the Doolittle first, so it was a LORT contract, but when they came to New York, they went into a production house and turned into a production contract.
Now-
It all depends on who moves it. quite
Legally,
honestly.
can you This is not a loaded question, but legally, can you build a set at Goodspeed and put it up in the Lyceum? Doesn't it need a stamp?
I think it needs a stamp. It needs a stamp. But
are you
years ago?
But it was enhanced, so there was.
When it gets physically enhanced,
do you mean physically, or are you permitted to by union rules?
Right. That's what he asked.
I think they are not necessarily compatible. You have to understand that the main stage is one of the most difficult stages in the world to do a show on. It has no crossover backstage. It has no flies. It has no wings
at all. And it's 27 feet
and
wide.
It's 27 feet wide. Now, no other theater that I've ever worked in presents those kind of restrictions.
We try not to hire actors over 6 foot because they look
true.
out of scale.
But
and
the
they can't walk
reality
off
is
stage without bending.
that you have to move it. If you move it, if it does get moved, it must be enhanced. In a strange way, an easier theater to work in is the Norma Terrace, which presents. It has wing space, and theoretically, it owns a turntable.
Yes.
And you can have a crossover there. So.
Right. And it's on ground level, so you can load the scenery from the truck into the theater as opposed to hoisting it up an elevator shaft.
We're a 6th-floor building. It's actually on the 5th floor of our building. It's a fascinating. And Mrs. Stevenson asked about our staff. It is a very unique way of producing, and what's great about the continuity of staff and the expertise of the staff is, I was just speaking to someone yesterday, and I said, what you don't understand is if you bring in somebody who is not familiar with this theater technically to work in this theater, they're going to spend the vast majority of their time shaking their heads saying, how on earth do you do anything in here? We have this group of people who've been there so long that they can make things happen in the most unconducive space possible to a degree that you would never expect. And you watch shows, and frankly, the more you know about the backstage at Goodspeed, the more you can sit and go, where are they pulling those sets out of? Because there is no backstage, there is no wing space, there is nothing. Everything has to fold up.
No storage space at all.
There's virtually nothing. If you go
Everything's built in pieces, so when it comes off stage, it's broken apart, and they fly it up in the air to get it out of the way. And add 20 actors and 6 stagehands to that. And
I would say fly is a misnomer. It's hauled up. And the crossover, if you run downstairs across and go upstairs, you can do it. Yes.
You know, when we did Animal Crackers out there, we had a harp and a piano on stage and 3 turntables. Where it went, I never went backstage. It was too scary. This piano would go off, and you'd never see it again. It was really taken and hauled up. You'd see a harp hanging in the ceiling, and it had to come down at the right moment.
It's often said some of the most interesting choreography at Goodspeed is happening backstage.
What is
no slight on any of our choreographers, but it really is a puzzle.
What is the ticket price now?
I think our top price on weekends is $32. Is that right?
Yeah.
How much?
I think the front row the front row of the mezzanine may be 35 on
Yeah, but you can't buy those. Those families have had those for years. You can get your hands
on the Royal Box.
And it's less at Chester, isn't it?
Chester's $21.
$21.
What is the membership, yearly membership on?
The basic minimum membership, family membership, is $35, which gives you a number of benefits, the opportunity.
How many shows do you do a year?
We do 6 total. We do 3 on the main stage and 3.
And how long is your season? Because that's gotten longer and longer.
Longer
by the
longer.
way, membership gives you parking privileges. By the way,
no, we let everybody.
Everybody gets
It's
rural. We open mid-April and close mid-December generally. Yeah.
And
we
that's
go into rehearsal.
grown and grown.
We've stretched it as far as we can. I mean, we're out in the woods, and people don't want to drive there in January and February.
What do you do now? You do about a 14 or 16 week playing?
No, the
12?
main stage shows run anywhere from 11 to 13 weeks, and then the Norma Terrace, they run 3 or 4 weeks.
Right, because I remember when I was there initially as a kid, we ran for, I think, 4 weeks.
Yep. Right, because it was literally, I think, 4th of July until Labor Day, and then it went Memorial Day until Labor Day, and then it went.
In 1976, when we did Annie, we were. It's funny. We were talking a minute ago, and I just want to say that while we don't have in good, and I like to use we a lot when we talk about Goodspeed. I feel more we than I in the whole circumstance. But there may not be a general store, there may not be all of that, but there are more critics. There are more little newspapers in that community than anywhere in the world. When we opened, we got 37 reviews. I mean, the Moodus Times, or
a bastion of journalism.
I mean, unbelievable. Mimeographed newspapers were doing reviews.
Well, I'll tell you something, though. Let's talk about the New London Day, which is good.
Right.
Actually, that has grown, I think, largely in part by Goodspeed being there as a pretty good critical newspaper. It has grown as a good journal. In the old days, they wouldn't. I was once told by the New London they wouldn't review anything more because they reviewed something once at Goodspeed, and the people involved, Mr. Sullivan, got so mad at them they're never going to go back there.
Well, you know, but now they have two critics in the day, because it used to be that the food critic was also the theater critic.
Right, right.
But, you know, one thing that is extraordinary and a great benefit is the state of Connecticut has a remarkable wealth of theater. There is the Yale Rep, the Long Wharf, the Hartford Stage Company, and Goodspeed alone, but four of the premier, the National Theater of the Deaf, the O'Neill Center, all of these amazing facilities that exist in a very small place, and that does engender the amount of attention given to theater because there is so much and it's become such an important part of the state.
It is such an important part to the extent that I don't know anywhere else on any highway where there is a green sign, Connecticut Turnpike sign, that says Goodspeed Opera House. I mean, obviously in Santa Fe, you know, but those places, I mean, to warrant that is really amazing.
Well, I will say, in this context, too, with Isabel here, that every professional theater in the state of Connecticut has won a regional theater Tony Award.
That's
every
true.
single one. And no other state in the union can make that. I say that as a Connecticut person as well as a New Yorker. But it's kind of remarkable in that state. You have every, including Goodspeed.
And Goodspeed also draws not only on the New York, in other words, it doesn't only come south, it comes from Boston and Hartford, I mean, which are also thriving theatrical communities, and I think audiences do come down as well as go up.
I have two questions I want to ask. Do you use local talent at all in your productions?
Occasionally, yes.
No.
Occasionally, is that true?
You're saying yes, you do.
Occasionally we do. Yeah, we every year we hold local auditions, and occasionally we get people out of that.
And what about schools? Do you work with the schools? Do you bring the schools in, or do you go out?
Very actively, and this year for the first time we also took the opportunity to help the local high school form its own drama club, and all of our staff volunteered their time to go in and help them do their first production, and that was very exciting. It's how a lot of us got our start, and it was our chance to give something
There's another
back.
very important thing that occurs. I don't know if it occurs on the main stage, but I know it has occurred on any number of occasions on the smaller stage at Chester, which is the opportunity for what you call talkbacks, which is a relationship between the event that's being performed and the audience. So basically, they're invited to stay after a performance. The actors and usually the creative staff will also stay, and a serious discussion will take place where we get probably the best kind of feedback that you can possibly get, because in the final analysis, the audience is the final collaborator, and it's very healthy. It's a very healthy circumstance.
Martin, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is terrible for me to have to direct a director, but this is we have to bring this to you, and there's just not enough time to get all the questions answered, and you've been wonderful in sharing your knowledge and what you do with us. I think that Goodspeed Opera Company is indeed unique, and I'm proud to have been able to present to the people that have been watching this and that are here today the Goodspeed Opera Company's team of the production, how it works and what a resident or regional theater does. And this is certainly an outstanding example. I'm Isabel Stevenson. These seminars are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and it's just one more service of the American Theater Wing. Thank you for being here.